I asked my Instagram followers what they wanted to see, and they said watercolor painting. So today I'm delivering on that promise. Today I'm going to take you through a pet portrait done in watercolor. We're going to go from the start, which starts in Procreate, and the end, which ends with the painting process, and decisions that I make in between. And also we're going to talk about some of the supplies that I use so you can set up your own watercolor painting studio at home. All right, let's rock and roll. I start my painting process actually in the iPad. I use Procreate to sketch out my imagery. This allows me to adjust it and really try to get as close of a likeness as I can. I start with the big shapes and then whittle it down to the smaller details. You don't have to begin this way. You can actually use a regular piece of paper, or you can draw directly on your watercolor paper, and both of these ways are effective too. I just find that working digitally actually enables me to work faster. And then what I do is I print out my image and I transfer it to watercolor paper, much like you would if you had just drawn on a regular piece of paper. So here I'm doing a little planning ahead. I'm using a light box here, but you can actually do the same technique on a window pane. What I'm doing is I'm tracing out the cat shape so I can cut it out of this vellum, and then I'll place the vellum over that area on my watercolor paper so I can do some splatter painting without getting the cat itself wet or splatter in that area. You can also use other products, masking products that can help keep areas from being affected, but here, since it's such a large area, I just decided to cut out the shape. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how you transfer your watercolor drawing to your watercolor paper. I use Serral transfer paper and attach it to the back of my printout of my cat, and then you actually have to trace your image and it will transfer where you've traced to your watercolor painting. This is probably the most effective way I've found to date to do this. If you can't afford transfer paper, you can always take a piece of graphite and put it on the back of your drawing and transfer it. That way, the premise is still the same. But the nice thing about using this transfer paper is it's easily erasable with a kneaded eraser. And here you can see I'm going in and I'm actually cleaning up and erasing some of these dark spots, and in places I'll be redrawing just to get a better line. But it's a really quick and easy way to transfer a drawing. Also, as you can see, I've taped off the edge of my watercolor paper. I just prefer to have a little bit of an edge. This way, when you go to frame a picture, you also have a little give and leeway. You can see where the mask comes in handy here. As I splatter and splash paint on my watercolor paper, that cat is protected and I don't get paint where I don't want it. Now, another suggestion that I would make to you would be to put down a piece of paper towel near your water bowl, because I always drip paint water on my paintings where I don't want it. And that just protects it just a little bit. And then just paint away. One of the most satisfying feelings is removing the tape when you're done with a watercolor painting. It's probably my favorite part. I decided to do a second version of this painting because I wasn't completely satisfied with the first one, and you'll notice it doesn't have blue in the blanket, and I liked it better. So the process was the same. I just did an additional painting, which I don't always do, but in this case I did. And here's the finished piece. Okay, so let's talk art supplies. Below you see a listing of all the art supplies that I used for this project. We'll start with our paint selection. Right now I'm using professional grade paints, which you may graduate towards after you kind of decide whether you like watercolor painting or not. But for me, there's definitely a difference between student grade and professional grade paints, and I definitely recommend exploring higher end brands if you start selling your artwork. As you can see below, I use Holbein and Shinhan watercolor paints for the paints that I use, and they are two separate brands for those of you who aren't familiar, and both are great brands. I also use a professional grade paper because it does make all the difference, and unlike traditional watercolor painters, I actually use hot pressed paper instead of cold pressed, and cold pressed is just rougher paper than the hot pressed, which is smooth. I find that I can blend a lot easier, and I like it a lot more. So the great thing about Fabriano paper is it comes in a block, so I can either tape down the edges or clamp it to the block to keep it from buckling as badly, and you don't have to stretch it. And what it means by stretching is put it in water and let it soak and then staple it to a board. I can kind of bypass all of that by using the block. Next, I use Trekell brushes and Winsor Newton brushes. A lot of these brushes that are Winsor Newtons that I have are 20 years old. I've had them since I was in school. And I use round brushes because they hold the bead of water better than a flat brush. So I like that, so it's not creating marks in my watercolor. I'm just seamlessly moving that bead along so it can transition nicely. Next, for transferring my illustration to my watercolor paper, I use Serral transfer paper, and you can order this on Dick Blick or probably on Amazon even. It's really a godsend because all you have to do is cut it to fit, and you put it on the back of your illustration, and you can attach it to your watercolor paper and just trace over your drawing, and it just transfers seamlessly, and you can erase it with a kneaded eraser. Also, you can see there I have a kneaded eraser, and that's exactly what I use it for, is to erase marks that I don't want on my drawing, or to lighten my marks there. Then you can see I have water receptacle, painter's tape to tape off the edges, paper towels, and also I use a cheap foldable palette. This is great for traveling, and that's really why I use it. Generally, if you're working larger, you're going to have a bigger palette to use. So those are the supplies that I use, and you can see them kind of listed next over there. So check it out, take a snapshot. You know, if you're a beginner, maybe you're not going to work into the professional art supplies just yet, but if you're finding that you're kind of having trouble, don't be afraid to change up your paper or your paint or your brushes to see if that kind of helps you go to the next level.
And that wraps up watercolor painting with Paige. If you have questions or comments, please leave them down below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you aren't following me on the interwebs, check out the links down below so you can check out the latest work that I'm creating. And yeah, until next time, stay creative.